Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about why alt season has been so elusive this market cycle. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. You've probably heard a lot of influencers and just about everyone call for alt season at some point over the last 3 to 3.5 years. But as we've been talking about, essentially all of those calls for alt season were categorically wrong. If you remember back in 2022, a lot of people called for it during the bear market. In 2023, a lot of people called for it, and in 2024. But instead of getting any form of alt season, what we have actually seen happen is Bitcoin dominance continue to go higher. Now, if you're new to crypto, it's probably worthwhile to at least attempt to define what alt season even is. For some people, there are times in the market cycle where it might have felt like alt season. But for anyone who's been in crypto for a long time, alt season is when Bitcoin dominance collapses and alt USD pairs go up. That is alt season. And you can pretty clearly see two alt seasons on this chart, the Bitcoin dominance chart. You had one right there in 2017 and one in 2021. So that is what alt season looks like. This is not what alt season looks like. In 2019, for instance, Bitcoin dominance basically just went up, really from 2018 through the end of 2020. I will change this to a separate color, but that is not what alt season looks like. Just like this has not been alt season. So I want to talk about why alt season has remained so elusive and why the people that keep calling for it have continued to be wrong. One of the reasons people talk about alt season is because a lot of people really want to make money quickly, right? But for several years in the cryptoverse, oftentimes the best strategy is just to stick with Bitcoin and get nice and steady gains. Now, for a traditional investor who invests in the stock market, to get a 6x move in say 2 years would be incredible. In crypto, Bitcoin is up about 6x from the bottom, but a lot of people would argue that's not enough. But the reason why it's so important is because if you can identify if you're not in alt season, then you're better off with Bitcoin and preserving the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. So if you train your mind to think in terms of sats, Satoshis, instead of US dollars, then you'll likely be a lot more successful in the cryptoverse. So instead of buying altcoins when you think alt season is going to actually begin, instead of buying it with US dollars, if you just bought it with Bitcoin instead, that's how you can really make the most of it. And then the goal is to ultimately increase the amount of sats that you own. So why have all of these calls for alt season been so wrong? Like what did people get wrong this cycle, and what can we look for this year to see if it's ever actually going to change this cycle? Well, one of the things back in 2022 that made a lot of people think that alt season was going to occur, and even 2023 and 2024, was that so many new coins were being created. And so one of the arguments that people gave was that since so many coins are being created, that there's no way Bitcoin dominance can go up because it's competing with more and more coins. But the simple counter argument, right? And this was the counter argument I gave back then, and obviously it's going to appear a lot more obvious to people today, is just because you increase the number of coins doesn't mean you increase the amount of money that's going to go into the altcoin market, right? You still have the same amount of money sort of sloshing around in the altcoin market, whether you have 10 coins or 20,000 or a million, it doesn't really matter. It just means that the liquidity gets spread thinner and thinner, right? So, by the way, this chart, it can be somewhat abstract for a lot of people. And so a better way to think about it is to look at alt Bitcoin pairs, for instance, like the ETH Bitcoin chart. And even that can be abstract to people. Like, what does it mean by 0.027, right? Like, what does that even mean? But if you look at the inverse of this stuff, so the Bitcoin ETH valuation, you can see that in 2021 and 2022, one Bitcoin would have gotten you around 11 ETH. Today, it gets you around 36. And at this wick right here, it got you around 42, which is actually the same level it wicked to right there in November of 2017. So that is why it's so important to denominate your portfolio in sats, because now each Bitcoin is worth 36 ETH as opposed to 12. 3 times more ETH for each Bitcoin, which is a lot. And it's also sort of an acknowledgement of just saying, you know what, no one really knows where the USD valuation of Bitcoin is going to go, but it's a lot easier to predict when these types of moves are going to occur. Now, what were we able to look at back in 2021 to allow us to understand that this was the most likely scenario? Well, as I've mentioned a few times, what allowed for it was just the understanding of tighter monetary policy. And knowing that last cycle, we did not see ETH Bitcoin bottom, or the inverse of that, top, right? We didn't see the Bitcoin ETH valuation top until the Fed ended quantitative tightening, right? And so you can see that the Fed's been doing the same exact thing this cycle. And throughout this process, just like last cycle, ETH has lost value to Bitcoin. Now, the same could be said about a lot of altcoins, right? You could say the same thing about a lot of the altcoins. And in fact, if you look at a basket of alts, right, total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, you can see that in fact they have put in new lows this week. And my argument has always been that they will likely eventually go to the range low before there's really a great hope of any alt season being able to occur. You could also look at others Bitcoin and see that it has just dropped since 2022 began. And so there's a lot of people that sort of call this the meme coin super cycle, and they try to get you pumped up for alt season by saying these meme coins are going to outperform. But at the end of the day, they just keep on bleeding to Bitcoin. And now, we're 3 years after this top over here, and others Bitcoin has put in a new low once again. Others is everything outside of the top 10, at least what TradingView tracks, divided by the Bitcoin market cap, and it just continues to go lower. So why is all this? Well, I think a lot of it has to do with quantitative tightening. And I think quantitative tightening has a lot to do with the fact, the continuation of quantitative tightening has to do with this chart of alt Bitcoin pairs and recognizing that there was not a pivot by the Fed last cycle until alt Bitcoin pairs reached the range low. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, Ben, hold on a second. It's not like Powell is looking at the alt Bitcoin chart and be like, all right, well, I can't pivot yet. But I think one of the use cases of crypto is maybe it gives you insight into liquidity conditions and the overall economy. And until you see them down here, you could argue that weakness might just not show up in the data for then the Fed to be willing to pivot, right? So the reason that you might not yet have, the reason why you haven't had all season, in my opinion, is because quantitative tightening never ended. But the reason quantitative tightening never ended is because the degens they haven't given up this cycle as quickly as they did last cycle, right? Last cycle, they gave up by 2019, right? I didn't really, I guess it depends on what you mean by give up, right? I mean, I was buying altcoins in late 2018 and thinking I was a genius, buying them throughout throughout this period right there, and looking back on it a year or two later and just being like, yeah, I probably should have just bought Bitcoin instead, and I would have made more money. And so this cycle, I wanted to make sure I didn't fall into that trap. So instead of buying altcoins, I just stuck mostly with Bitcoin. And so I think the real reason you haven't seen alt season again is because there was never an end to quantitative tightening, and there was never an end to quantitative tightening because the consumer has held on for a lot longer this cycle than they did last cycle. If you look at last cycle, the amount of time it took for alt Bitcoin pairs to reach the range lows from the peak was about 87 weeks. But this cycle, it's taken a lot longer from the peak, right? We're now at 178 weeks or so. So this is why this bull market feels so different than what a lot of you probably experienced in 2020 and in 2021. A lot of people joined crypto in 2020 and 2021, and during that period, most assets were going up against Bitcoin rather than down, right? They were generally trending up. And then there was a very brief period where they went down, and then they just continued to go up for a while. So that is what people remember. That is why this cycle feels so different, because alt Bitcoin pairs have continued to go lower. Now, one of the things you can look at is something that we call the social risk. The social risk is made up of 5 different risk metrics. One on YouTube subscribers to crypto YouTube channels, YouTube views to crypto YouTube channels, the same ones, and then followers to various analysts, exchanges, and layer ones on Twitter or X. And you can look at all of them and kind of just see where they are right now. And that's what they look like individually. You can show all of them as well and see that they more or less ebb and flow together. But you can also average them out to get a single risk metric, and it looks like that. Now, in order to get alt season, you need retail to durably come back, and not just where we sit here and we say, oh, they're back, but really it's just the same old people pretending like someone's back. One of the things you'll notice is that in the 2017 alt season and the 2021 alt season, social risk was durably going up. You see that? It was durably going up. It was putting in higher lows, and it was going higher. But so far this cycle, we haven't really seen that, right? Every time that social risk has gone above 0.4, it then just goes back down. Now, last cycle, there was a couple of times where it popped above 0.4, and then eventually it just continued to go, and that's ultimately what led into alt season. But in order to get that, you need a rally by Bitcoin that's longer than just, a really brief period of time. Because it's that longer rally by Bitcoin that truly brings retail back. Now, I think the reason you haven't had that type of rally, these rallies over here have been a lot more tame compared to what we saw over here in 2021 and what we saw at the tail end of 2017. I think that a lot of it has to do with macro conditions like inflation, and not really just inflation, but it's more the reaction function of the Fed due to the inflation. And that's caused them to go, to much more restrictive monetary policy than they did in prior cycles. So really, to see kind of confirmation of what could eventually be an alt season, you would want to see social risk put in higher highs, right? And actually go above 0.4 and stay above it. If you just view some of these metrics, like views to crypto YouTube channels, this is what it looks like. And in 2021, at the top, we were essentially, these crypto channels collectively were averaging around 4 million views per day. But this cycle, we've only seen spikes to 2 million views a day, right? So this is not the same as 2021. It's nowhere near as euphoric as 2021. The market conditions are a lot different. You know how earlier I was talking about why this cycle feels different, even though you can't quite put your finger on it, right? Like, and what I mean by that is if you look at a cycle ROI of Bitcoin from, say, the market cycle bottom back in late 2022, if you look at it, you could argue that Bitcoin's kind of doing what it always does, right? I mean, it's actually tracking the 2016, 2017 cycle pretty closely so far, and it's been generally going up like the 2019 cycle as well. and even had some similarities with the 2019 cycle, as at one point the 2019-2020 cycle got ahead of schedule, and then it faded into the prior cycle ROI, just like this cycle kind of got ahead of the 2019 cycle and then faded until it got back in line. So if Bitcoin is doing the same thing that it always does, why does the cycle feel so different to everyone? Well, the answer, again, is due to the continuation of quantitative tightening by the Federal Reserve. And if you look actually at the advanced decline index for the top 100 cryptocurrencies, I would encourage you to pause the video here and read the description and the usage. But essentially, what it gives you an idea of is the asset class trending higher as a whole? Like, are there more assets going up than down? Or are there more assets going down than up? So when there's more assets going down than up, it means that there's, and if the market cap, if total market cap is going up, there's a divergence. What that means is that you only have a few cryptocurrencies that are responsible for total market cap going higher, primarily Bitcoin, and then a few of the altcoins. But a lot of the cryptocurrencies are not really contributing to total market cap going higher. In fact, a lot of them are contributing to it being lower, right? And if you think about it, Bitcoin is at new all-time highs this cycle. But even the number 2 cryptocurrency, ETH, has not. And a lot of cryptocurrencies, if you think about it, as you go down the list, a lot of them, most of them, have not hit new all-time highs. And so this part of the cycle, last cycle, lasted a lot shorter. This cycle, it's lasted a lot longer. And let me show you what I mean. So in the last cycle, when the Fed began quantitative tightening, you can see that it led into a bear market for alt Bitcoin pairs. And then alt Bitcoin pairs bottomed when quantitative tightening ended, right? It's pretty clear. You can pretty clearly see that. Now, the advanced decline index started going down, right? It started going down. And you can see here, like, alt Bitcoin pairs started dropping in 2018. The ADI started going down a lot here in 2018, right? It was up at these highs for a while, and then it started going down. It did not bottom until after quantitative tightening ended. Quantitative tightening ended in September of 2019. The ADI, Advanced Decline Index, of the top 100 cryptocurrencies, bottomed just about 1 quarter later in December, right? So you just had October, November, December. 3 months later, the Advanced Decline Index bottomed. So when a lot of people joined crypto after the pandemic crash in March of 2020, the Advanced Decline Index for the top 100 cryptocurrencies was already going back up. So back then, it felt like alt season because most alts were going up. And the asset class as a whole was going up as everything basically in the asset class was also going up, right? So it was a more inclusive bull market where most everything in the top 100 was going up together. A lot of people say the cycle feels different, but they can't put their finger on why. It's because there hasn't really been any form of an alt season. And the reason for that, again, is because quantitative tightening never actually ended. And so we are still in this phase of the cycle, as crazy as that sounds, right? As crazy as that sounds, because that phase of the cycle, last market cycle, ended in the pre-halving year. So if that had been the same for this cycle, it would have been as if it had ended in 2023, and then things would have changed. But quantitative tightening never ended. Therefore, the Advanced Decline Index has continued to drop. And I saw someone describe it like this the other day, and I thought it was a fitting way to think about the market. It's almost like a zombie bull market where, and I actually talked about this in 2022, where I said you could get a Bitcoin only rally, and it's lasted far longer than I thought it was going to. And it doesn't mean that nothing goes up. Obviously, many assets are off their lows, but I think at this point in the cycle, you probably know what I mean, right? It's like the only way that other assets go up is if Bitcoin goes up and it lifts those assets higher. Like it brings them kicking and screaming, even though they don't really want to go, but they'll go up if Bitcoin goes up. But then the minute Bitcoin drops, right? The minute Bitcoin even thinks about sneezing, the altcoin market collapses, right? And so this cycle feels different because quantitative tightening never ended. But this is exactly what happened last cycle. It's just that this phase of the cycle was a lot shorter last cycle, right? Last cycle, it lasted about 1.5 to 2 years. This cycle, it's been lasting already more than 3 years. And arguably, it's just a 4-year cycle. So what it means is that whenever we do see a pivot from quantitative tightening to quantitative easing, that phase of the cycle could be a lot shorter this market cycle because we just won't have as much time. So going back to this idea about alt Bitcoin pairs, and it's one of these things I've talked about a lot, and I've sort of second guessed myself internally at times. But I mean, I've always come out and said that alt Bitcoin pairs, the most likely outcome is for them to go to the range low, especially until quantitative tightening ends. It's one of those things where, like, it's easy to sort of make fun of the view of alt Bitcoin pairs going to the range lows, especially considering it hasn't happened yet. But also, this view has been directionally correct, especially since alt Bitcoin pairs have put in new lows this week. It's one of those things where, like, and I've talked about this a lot, especially as it relates to ETH Bitcoin. In order to really get the alt season that people want, the altcoin market has to go where those people don't want it to go. That's kind of like the dilemma, you know? As long as alt Bitcoin pairs just kind of keep holding this trend line and they don't go down here, then what reason is there to go back up here? And I think that is the dilemma, right? In order to get the alt season that you want, you have to feel the pain first. You have to see alt Bitcoin pair. And I not have to, right? I'm just sort of speaking my own opinion. I could be wrong. I have expressed one potential outcome is a Fed pivot too soon, where you get an alt Bitcoin rally before it goes down here. But if that happens, it would likely resolve to a macro lower high where it wouldn't go back up here, right? The way you go back up there is to first go down here. I've seen individual altcoins that don't go back to the range low in a cycle, but then the returns for those altcoins end up being muted in the bull market because they never truly got rinsed out in the bear for the alt Bitcoin pairs. So again, it was kind of like what I was talking about with Ethereum USD, right? The only way for ETH Bitcoin to really durably go up is to feel the pain on ETH USD, right? So the only way for the alt season that people want to occur is for alt Bitcoin pairs to go where they said they would never go. Because until they go there, you could argue the Fed doesn't really have a compelling reason to end quantitative tightening. If the market's doing well, if real GDP's humming along at 2 to 3%, if layoffs remain low and initial claims remain low, what reason is there? Because if they pivot too soon, they run the risk of inflation coming back. Now, I don't really think that's the most likely outcome in the short term, if I'm being honest. But I think that hopefully that answers the question for a lot of people as to why this cycle feels different and why there hasn't actually been an alt season, right? And I know some people are like, well, my altcoin is up 10x. Well, I have good news for you. I wasn't talking about your altcoin, right? I was talking about everyone else's. The other thing to remember is that I'm sort of talking about generalities, right? I'm collectively the altcoin market is bleeding against Bitcoin. There's always a few that are counter to that trend. But again, as I've said for years, you would have to cherry pick the few to say the trend, to sort of go against the trend rather than the other way around, right? There's more dropping against Bitcoin than going up against Bitcoin. Just like when you look at the advanced decline index, there's more assets in the top 100 going down than up. And the way that this brutal downtrend ends is for a pivot by the Fed. But the way the Fed pivots is to feel the pain first. So to get the alt season you want, I think alt Bitcoin pairs have to go where people don't want them to go. Now, they did get pretty close, admittedly. They did finally go to 0.33. So we have made progress, right? It's not like we're not making progress. But even from that level, you're still about 20 to 25% off the lows. Now, I would argue that viewing altcoins as oscillators at best is correct, and it's the optimistic way to view the market, where they basically just range between 0.25 and 1. They bottom out around the time that the altcoin market cap collectively reaches parity with, or 25% of Bitcoin's market cap, and they top out when they reach approximately parity with Bitcoin, where the altcoin market cap collectively is equivalent to Bitcoin's market cap. I say they're oscillators at best, not worst, meaning I would assume that the best case scenario is that they bottom here. That's best case, because the other way to look at it is the pessimistic view, which a lot of people aren't going to want to hear, but I'm going to show it anyways for completeness. Leave no stone unturned here. Because technically, we've seen lower highs and lower lows in the altcoin market, right? You had a high and a lower high and a low and a lower low. So because of that, right, and you can actually see right now that if you sort of draw this parallel channel out, right now, alt Bitcoin pairs, they've been kind of holding support right at that center trend line. You see that? Like, that's where they basically have spent a lot of their time, just like they spent a lot of their time around that level right there before eventually fading and dropping all the way down to the bottom of that channel. So I would say they're oscillators at best, because that's the optimistic view, that you don't look at them as bleeders, but instead oscillators. But there's a chance they go below 0.25. I'm just simply arguing that until they go to 0.25, the chances that you really get an alt season are really slim. That doesn't mean that alt USD pairs can't go up. They will likely go up if Bitcoin goes up. But if the altcoin market going up requires Bitcoin to go up first, then why not just hold Bitcoin, right? Why hold the thing that requires something else to go up itself? And I think that's kind of been the argument for the last few years, and that's why we spent so many years talking about Bitcoin dominance and preserving the Satoshi valuation of your portfolio. So I think it's a really interesting way to think about the market. The other thing to think about when it comes to, something like the social risk, right? If you go look at the social risk again, the other thing to think about is that in order to really make Bitcoin dominance go down, you need to see retail come back. And one of the ways to visualize that is to go over to the workbench that we have on the website. Again, we still have the sale going on. Make sure you guys check it out. Links in the description below. But if you look at the social risk that we just showed, and then you plot on here, you plot Bitcoin dominance without stablecoins, you will notice that as social risk is low, Bitcoin dominance goes up, right? As the social risk is either going down or staying at a low level, Bitcoin dominance goes up. But whenever the social risk starts to go up, that's when Bitcoin dominance crashes, right? Because that's when all the retail investors come in and they buy all these altcoins up, and then they end up having to hold the bag for the next several years until they get another alt season. And a lot of these people end up weighing the altcoin market down during times like this, because a lot of them become bag holders and they watch Bitcoin go up and they're like, oh, well, now my altcoin's going to do the same. It doesn't. It goes to a lower high, and then they end up capitulating. And that's why those alts, have a bigger burden to bear than Bitcoin. So I think that is why alt season has not occurred. And if you want confirmation for that, there's actually an altcoin season index, and there's only been 2 times since 2021 ended. Well, I guess, I mean, there's a couple of wicks right here, but there haven't really been that many times where you've seen alt Bitcoin or this indicator go into alt season, where altcoins are really outperforming Bitcoin. The only time we saw it happen, briefly, was back in in December of 2024, right here. But it's not what you're looking for, right? Because it was only for a few days. What you're looking for is where it spends weeks there, like in 2017, and weeks to months there, like it did in 2021. right? That's what you're looking for. That hasn't happened. The closest that we've come to it was in 2022, but that was in a bear market, and that was actually just before there was another capitulation by Bitcoin, which ultimately took the total market cap lower. So when you look at a chart like this, because the only one that looks remotely like it could be considered alt season was actually still during a bear market. So it was Bitcoin, it was altcoins were outperforming Bitcoin, but the market still really wasn't doing that great. Overall, it was just all Bitcoin pairs were going up. Because we haven't really seen a sustained period like that in the market since 2021, I think you can pretty clearly say that there hasn't really been an alt season. And hopefully I just did a okay job of explaining why there hasn't been an alt season, is because quantitative tightening never ended, because the economy was holding up okay, and because of that, alt Bitcoin pairs never went to the range lows, justifying a Fed pivot. To get what you want, alt Bitcoin pairs, I think, have to go where people don't want them to go. Now, there's one counter argument that I want to at least mention. When you look at a chart like this, it's easy to just say, well, they have to go to the range lows, right? They have to go to 0.25. Now, the counter argument to that is that I'm only subtracting out USDT. First of all, if we just look at alt Bitcoin pairs without subtracting out any stable coins, they're actually, a lot higher, right? And actually, they're right around the level that they broke down from in 2019 that then led into a Fed pivot, right? So I don't know. Maybe we're entering into that right now, right? Maybe that's what's about to happen. I'm not really sure, but it is worth keeping an eye on. You could also look at total 2 divided by Bitcoin, which includes ETH, and you can see this chart has been moving down pretty quickly, right? I mean, it just moved down to the level that it was capitulating to in July of 2019. And remember back then, that was 2 months away from a Fed pivot from quantitative tightening to quantitative easing. It was only 2 months away. But the counterpoint, right? The counterpoint is that if you look at total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin, it could be easy to say that these need to go to the range lows, which is kind of my base case. But you could also include, other stable coins in here as well, right? Like we could actually add in here USDC as well. And if you include USDC, the range low is still basically 0.25, but in this case, they've already gone down to 0.3, right? So in this case, from that low, it would only be about a 16% drop in order to get to the range low. So again, it all goes back to this idea that to get what people want, they have to feel the pain first of all Bitcoin pairs going to the range low. Again, that view could be wrong, but we've been following that view for the last 3 years, and it has proven itself to be correct time and time again, right? With all Bitcoin pairs putting in new lows this week, it's been at least directionally correct for the last 3 years. It could come to pass that all Bitcoin pairs don't go to the range lows. But regardless, that narrative that has helped us preserve the Satoshi valuation of our portfolio was based on quantitative tightening and based on this idea that altcoins are oscillators at best, and based on the idea that you don't really get alt season until after all Bitcoin pairs go to the range low. So those are my views on the market, and hopefully that at least is at least some explanation for people as to why alt season has not occurred. Some of this might be new to you if you just follow other channels that call for alt season every couple of months. And it's really hard because I know a lot of people call for it and everyone loves them. And they're like, well, Ben doesn't know what he's talking about because, I want my altcoin to go up. But remember, a lot of them are just trying to hype you up. And a lot of times they're actually getting paid to promote meme coins, right? And so it's in their interest to try to get people to believe it's alt season. But it's important to remain objective and to say, you know what? There's 2 things. There's what we want to happen and what we think will happen, right? I would love for alt season to occur, because if I truly thought it was about to occur, then it's pretty easy to make a lot of money during alt season because everything just goes up for, 4 to 5 weeks and several 100%, right? Who doesn't want that? That would be great. There's what we want to happen, and then there's what we think will happen, right? It's like back in 2022, You know, I mean, I was a huge bull on ETH Bitcoin from 2019 until, so basically the first video on my channel was right here, and it was about ETH Bitcoin, and I was very bullish on it, and I turned bearish on it right there. I missed the top, but I turned bearish on it right here. Okay? Did I want to turn bearish on it? Absolutely not. You know, it was fun being bullish on ETH Bitcoin. It was fun, you know, witnessing alt season for so long. There was what I wanted to happen, which is the continuation of that trend, but there was also what I thought was going to happen, which was, you know, going back over here and seeing that the Fed was shifting monetary policy and realizing that if this is going down, this is going down too. So again, we got to separate what we think is going to happen and what we want to happen. And a lot of times, like, what you think is going to happen can turn into what you want to happen because you want to take advantage of it if you're right. But I made a lot of enemies by being bearish on ETH Bitcoin, right? A lot of enemies. And again, it's just a reminder that markets change, market conditions change, and I actually hope that ETH Bitcoin bottoms out soon, and can go back the other way. It looks like we're getting pretty close to a final capitulation if it's not already in, but just remember last cycle ETH Bitcoin bottomed when quantitative tightening ended. Anyways, guys, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.